So I'm incredibly close to a nephew of mine, and he's going to be a father again soon. And so this is, so I'm going to be a great aunt for the second time for him, and I'm excited about this. And but when I get to work, sometimes when I sit down, I'll check my messages. I'll look at my phone. I'll check my messages. I have a elderly parents. I have a mother who has really poor health, so I try and keep, check a few times just to make sure that everybody's okay. And I saw a message from my nephew, and I was in a hurry and I needed to get a lot of things done. And so I read two things that really stood out, and that was induced and baby soon. Okay, so imagine how elated I was. I was so excited. I was like, oh my gosh, the baby's coming, this is, and so I waited half the day for news, and there's no news. Called my father at lunchtime, and I'm like, oh, hey, Dad, just to let you know, I know you don't use your phone for texting or anything. He has a little flip phone, so he never, he's elderly. I'm like, but you need to know that the baby's coming, so I want you to be in the loop with all of this. And so he was excited. And it's the evening, and I'm like, what is going on? So I'm like, what's going on? Sent it out to my sister, my mother. As it turns out, I didn't read the message fully. I was distracted. They're inducing on Monday. So I went through all of that because I was distracted, and this ties right into listening. So I just thought I'd share that story with you. How many of you have done something like this? Completely, okay, so good, I'm glad. And for those of you that haven't, there's probably something else that you've done that's similar. So let's move through this. What is listening? Does anybody think they're good listeners? Okay. Are you trained in listening? Is that part of your? Okay. It helps when you're trained in listening. Okay. So the rest of you don't really feel like you're good listeners. So, is that what you're saying? Sometimes you're a good listener. Okay. Okay. Let's put this to the test. I'm not going to test you right now on this, but let's say by tomorrow, how much would you remember of the discussions you had here at the tables? Uh-huh.
If I was given a question, I don't know if I can remember all the questions.
Careful note-taking maybe would make a difference here. The statistics don't really agree with what you said. We'll talk about that. We'll talk about what your book says. Okay, let's see. What about 2 days from now? How much do you think you'd remember? Did you say 5? 5%? That's pretty close. Yeah. It's 10. So by tomorrow, about 25%. Your book has a range in there, maybe 25 to 50%. So I think, did your book say 50%? About half? Or did you? Okay. So there's some ranges in what they say, but when you look at it, it's not really good. So it kind of shows that we aren't as good of listeners as we think we are. So we'll be talking about the process of listening and the distractions that come along with it, things we can do in order to help us, and also like listening styles and what we prefer to listen to makes a difference. The person in front of us makes a difference. And so we'll work through a couple of things so that we can be better listeners. Really important in a class like this. Also, we're going to be giving presentations to each other, so it's a good idea we have these listening skills up to par. So listening, what is it? I really miss not having a clicker. Oh, here it is. Delete. You can see it back here. that process comes out. So a process we know is what? When we talked about communication, what did we say when we said communication is a process? What did that process, what is that? How do we define that process?
Receiving what the other person's telling you and giving feedback.
Okay. Okay. So it's those steps that go through that. Now the other thing I liked, and this is the reason why I plugged this one, question? No. Okay. The reason why I grabbed this one from a different text is because this is the nonverbal component as well. That's a part of the listening process. So one thing I'm going to add in here is something called the Courier process. Brunel, I believe it was in her dissertation in 1996, she identified the steps in process in listening. And I think it's significant. Now, a lot of textbooks aren't having this in here, but I think if you take an advanced communication course, you're going to see this come up. So it's important for you to know that there's more to listening than just this first step. And that's what Brownell was identifying, all these different things. So the first thing is we have to be able to receive the stimuli in some way. Now, over here, when she identified this as hearing, there's a couple things I want to say, because the nonverbal component can come in at this time too, because that's a part of the listening process. That's a part of discerning what's going on. So if somebody gives you the peace sign, that's also received. So we can also consider that within this process. Now, hearing by itself is seeing something, or let's say it reaching your ears. That's just one thing, because we all know that that's not listening by itself. You can be in the cafeteria, it can be noisy, they can have music playing, and you have no idea what's going on because you're so involved in what you're doing. Okay, students have to do that. So that's not really the listening process, even though the function is there. You may see something, you may be hearing things. Now there's other things that your book talks about that's interesting, is the hearing process. We have these parts of ourselves that can actually recall, and recall is very different. Recall a certain amount of seconds. So even if, let's say, you're busy with something and somebody says something else, you're studying, they come up and you say, did you hear that? And you're like, da-da-da-da-da. You can actually recite that back without you actually processing it. So it's an amazing thing that we can do this. That's also the reason why we can do that, in a conversation when we're drifting off and somebody says something and you can recite the last few things that they said, last few seconds that they said, is because we have this ability to do that in our memories. But that's not listening. Now, as we get down through this, and now we're going to start into the listening process, this is not a clean step-by-step process. We move up and down this many times in one conversation. Understanding just means that is that agreement that we have, that symbolism that happens, the culture, the context that it's taking care of. So you're pulling in that information of understanding. When somebody says this, it means this. You're pulling in that nonverbal language. And then as we go through in the remembering phases, you're recalling from your own experiences and how this relates. As you go down to interpreting, this moves so fast. Interpreting is what your book and other books will call attribution. Attribution is what we do. This is where we're starting to process this information. Well, we've been processing it, but we are trying to make sense of what's going on in front of us. So this person said this because of this reason. This person not just asked me, hi, how are you doing? What did you do this weekend? Because they like me and they're genuinely interested. Or maybe they're being polite and they think they have to. So you go through this process, and this is why this happened. Now, attribution error is large. So we make a lot of mistakes in this process because we're humans and we have a lot of different perceptions. What's going on? You want to add?
No.
Okay. And then as we go through, evaluating is that judgments that happens. Now, this can be good or bad judgment, and it can also be based on false attribution. And then, of course, then we respond for that. And even the silent treatment is a response. So even if you think, I just didn't say anything, you did, because you didn't say anything. So that's the entire process of the listening cycle. We move back and forth on this, so you may come back later and let's say you're interpreting and you're evaluating and then you think back again, oh, but you know, I remember this other thing. And so you just move back and forth through this. Any questions? Okay. All right, let's get to some fun stuff. Types of listening. Okay, we can relate this in our lives. So first one, in your book does a really nice job explaining this. So when you have the opportunity to listen or to read through the listening chapter, they do a good job putting this chapter together. So the first one, we like things and we listen to them. What are those things? Music. Okay, big music fans in here. I rarely run across a person that says they don't like music. Okay, so we listen to music, we listen to the music that we like. What other things do we listen to just because we like it? That's the only reason.
Certain people?
Yeah. Absolutely. So certain people, it could be certain friends, you seek them out. It could be it could be somebody in the media that you just enjoy. You just like them, or maybe it's somebody that you're a fan of in sports, and you know whenever they talk, you just really like them. Nature. Okay. I'm glad you brought that up because that is appreciative listening. So anybody like at the end of a summer night like to listen to the cicadas? Okay. And then you're like, oh, it's going to get cold. You know, so that brings up a lot of appreciation. Or birds, ocean waves. Anybody big ocean fan? Okay. So yeah. So now nobody over here. What do you like to listen to?
I like rain.
Rain, thunderstorms, very nice. So yeah, these are things that we enjoy. Maybe they're calming, relaxing, maybe they're energizing. Okay, now we can start mixing and blending these together. So let's say, and I'm going to drop down and I'm going to add from the appreciative to informational or comprehensive. So we listen to things in order to understand. That's what you do in school. Maybe at work. Maybe you have a new client and you're working with a new client and you're trying to understand what their needs are. Okay, so that's a very important aspect. How many of you in your jobs you have to listen to understand? Okay, definitely. So our jobs and your future jobs are going to be reliant on you being able to understand whether it's your boss, whether it's a training seminar, whether it's just to understand, let's say, a political view of another person. So those are things that we do. We may like it, we may not like it. So we can actually put appreciative and comprehensive listening all in one. So you may listen to that song, you really like the song, and you may be drawn to the song because there's certain parts in the lyrics that you felt connected to. So then you look up the lyrics to try and understand what the song was really about. Okay, so we start combining those, or we don't have to. We can listen to something just to purely understand it. So like one of the things that can be very confusing is what's going on in our political arena right now. You know, so we have a huge thing going on. Impeachment, removal, not removal, and sometimes I just want to understand it. And so seeking those different viewpoints, even if I don't agree with the different viewpoints, can help gain a better understanding of what's going on. So so sometimes we're seeking things that we don't really like, necessarily, but just to understand. So those are two easily put together. They can all be put together. Critical. Now this is, I guess since I talked about the political arena, I might as well just add on to that. So you may hear something, but you have to make a decision for yourself, whether this is right or wrong in the way you feel, with your values and your beliefs that are all together. So critical thinking, that's one way you can use critical thinking. So what somebody says or does, or you see, does not necessarily mean that that is fact. Critical thinking says that you're discerning that information, kind of like looking at those references the other day. So you're not just trusting, you're looking at it and you're seeing, does that seem true or right with everything that I know? So if we take a look and we're like getting that information gathering from, let's say, a patient, and I think they're going to die in front of you, I think it's an aneurysm. I swear it's an aneurysm. I got to be having an aneurysm. I feel so terrible. And you're looking at this person, who's in the medical field in here? Okay, and you can see with critical thinking that that's not really what's going on. Okay, so that's what that is, and that just couples right into empathic thinking, empathetic. So to be empathetic, or to have that empathy, what does that mean? Okay, so you're making an effort to try and understand the feelings of another in this listening process. Now, it doesn't mean that you are necessarily always going to take those critical listening skills out. For example, in that example of the medical care provider. But to have that, you know, I'm trying to understand that what you're feeling is really terrible. Now, is it actually possible that we can feel what another person is feeling?
Yeah. I mean, if you've like been in the same situation, gone through the same thing,
Okay.
it's going to be neutral.
Okay, so this is a very tricky question. So MRIs that actually look at the emotions of others. So if you're asked to recall something that is deeply emotional and describe it to another person, if they hook up the MRIs to another person, they'll actually, the same areas of the brain will start to light up. So there's something there that says that we have an ability to. The research that I looked at, I can't remember the name of the person right now, but these researchers contributed that to what's called, and it's the same word that we use in here, but it doesn't mean the same thing, to mind mapping. And what that means is when we have an experience, the neurons in our brain have a certain pathway that kind of tells us, you know, where we're feeling. And what can happen is if I'm listening to your experience, and I've never had this experience before, so what I can do is think, well, you know, there was a time that I had something similar like that. And so that's what's going to start lighting up because I'm trying to relate to what you're saying. I actually can't feel what you're feeling, but there's something about that transfer of emotions that can happen. In my dissertation, it was largely focused on burnout and emotional intelligence in the community college classroom. So the research is quite extensive in this area. So the emotions are contagious in some way. It is impossible for us to understand what another person is feeling, but it is interesting that those areas will light up. So empathy is something, and this is the tricky thing. So if I go back to the late Stephen Covey, he said it's not really anything that you can do. I mean, you have to do certain things in order to have that feeling of empathy, but it isn't that you're like turning the right way and you're saying the right thing and have the right tone. It's the other person's perception. If they feel understood, then that empathetic listening has occurred and you've been successful. So it's a joint venture that you have with another person. So they can't just say, or I can't just say, I understand you, and you're gonna take my word for it. You have to feel it. And unless that happens, it's not happening. So it's a tricky thing. But there are things we can do in order to be better at it, and this is probably one of the hardest listening skills. So, what are some things that we can do to make our empathetic listening better? It's a relationship builder, by the way, so it's a really good skill to have.
Like our nonverbals,
Okay, so our nonverbals.
eye contact, and smiles or whatever.
Okay, so let's say that you're having a bad time, and I have the right nonverbal contact. So that wouldn't be a smile. That would probably be an expression of sadness, or maybe I'm listening and it's a situation where somebody was being ornery with you, and I'm like, really, and I'm listening. So I can have that in place, and so now I can start that mind mapping thing, It's just like, there was a time that this exact same thing happened to me, but it was worse. Let me tell you all about it. Okay, is that the most effective way? Why not?
Because if someone's hurting, they don't really want to hear just maybe how bad you were hurting at the time.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Why are you one-upping me? Okay, this isn't about what happened to you 20 years ago. This is the moment, and so that's a blunder that we can make. And the late Stephen Covey, he did a really nice job in just saying, you just make sure it's not about you. It's about the other person and what they're going through. That's the best tip that you can have. And some of you, human services in here? How many human services? Counseling? Other types of counseling? Okay, so I'm not at all surprised that you've had training in this, because that's something that's very focused in the classes that you're taking. If you end up taking some classes in the human services area, you'll see that come out. They train you in this. But those are some first steps for you. Okay, any questions about the different types of listening? Okay, let's move on.